Hello, this is Catherine Lamb Hansard here. This video will cover some of the key concepts in Chapter 3 on demand and supply, one of the most important chapters in the course. We are going to focus on establishing the model of supply and demand. The model of supply and demand is the foundation of economics, and for this reason, it is important that you spend time studying the concepts in this chapter, as it would really help you understand the later chapters in the course. Let's explore the term quantity demanded. Economists use the term quantity demanded to refer to the amount of a good or service buyers are willing and able to purchase. Willing and able means that the buyers want to and can afford to purchase the good. The law of demand states that if the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded of that good falls. But when the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded rises, while other things being equal. That is, while everything else is being held constant. The only thing that is changing is the price. This makes logic sense. If the price of a good is more expensive, people would buy less of it. If the price of a good is now cheaper, people would buy more of it. Another term you must be familiar with is demand schedule. A demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded, like this table here on the right. This demand schedule shows the market demand for gasoline. You have the price per gallon and quantity demanded in millions of gallons. Notice that as the price of gasoline increases, the quantity demanded falls, which obeys the law of demand. Demand shows the relationship between the price of a good and quantity demanded. It can be represented with a demand schedule or a demand curve, a graph with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Let's draw the demand curve for gasoline. When gasoline is priced at $0, quantity demanded is 16 million gallons. When the price goes up to $1 a gallon, quantity demanded falls to 14 millions of gallons. When you plot and connect all the points, you get a downward sloping demand curve. It is important to know the difference between demand and quantity demanded. Demand refers to a demand curve or a demand schedule, while quantity demanded refers to a point on the demand curve or quantity in a demand schedule. Now that we are familiar with different terms related to demand, let's take a look at factors that cause the demand curve to shift. Remember, the demand curve shows how price affects quantity demanded while other things being equal. So things that shift the demand curve must be non-price factors. In other words, things that determine the buyer's demand for a good other than the good's price. Changes in these factors will shift the demand curve. Let's take a look at one of the factors, number of buyers. An increase in the number of buyers would increase the quantity demanded at each price, shifting the demand curve to the right. For example, if there is an increase in population, this would shift the demand curve for gasoline to the right. If there is a decrease in the number of buyers, this decreases quantity demanded at each price, causing the demand curve to shift to the left. Let's look at this graphically. Suppose the number of buyers increases. Then at each price, quantity demanded will increase, say by 5 in this example. This will cause a parallel shift of the demand curve to the right. Another factor is income. For a normal good, other things being constant, an increase in income leads to an increase in demand. This would shift the demand curve to the right. For example, if everyone received a raise in their salaries, there will be an increase in the demand for cars. That is, the demand curve for cars would shift to the right. For an inferior good, a good that is often considered of lower quality, an increase in the income leads to a decrease in demand. This shifts the demand curve to the left. An example of inferior goods are products at the dollar store. When the economy is doing well and people's incomes are rising, less people would shop at the dollar store. But if the economy is bad, there would be an increase in demand for their goods. A third factor is complementary goods. That is, an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. An example of complementary goods are shoes and shoelaces, because they are often bought together. If there is an increase in the price of shoes, people would buy less shoes and therefore demand less shoelaces, hence shifting the demand for shoelaces to the left. Other examples of complements include tables and chairs, iPhones and iPhone cases, ice cream and ice cream cones. A fourth factor is substitute goods. Substitutes are goods that you can either buy one or the other. So an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. An example is pizza and hamburgers. If you consume pizzas and suddenly prices of pizzas go up, you would switch to hamburgers. So an increase in the price of pizzas increases the demand for hamburgers. The demand curve for hamburgers shifts to the right. Other examples of substitutes are Coke and Pepsi, iPhones and Androids, ebooks and print books. Expectations about the future is a demand curve shifter. When people expect an increase in their income, they increase their current demand. For example, if people expect their incomes to rise, their demand for new cars may increase now. But if the economy is looking bad, people may worry about their future job security. Demand for new cars may fall now. Expectations on future prices can shift the current demand curve. If prices are expected to be higher in the future, that could increase the demand now. For example, if people expect refrigerators prices to rise, their demand for new refrigerators may increase now as people avoid having to pay more later. Finally, taste is a demand curve shifter. Anything that causes a shift in taste towards a good will increase demand for that good and shift the demand curve to the right. For example, plant-based diets are becoming increasingly popular, causing an increase in demand for soy milk, vegan cheese, and Beyond Burgers. Now, I have a nice trick to memorize all these demand curve shifters. First, let's list them. Number of buyers, income, complementary goods, expectations about the future, substitutes, and taste. What is the word that you see? You see the word nisus. Now that's a nice trick to remember these factors. Let's go back to our example of gasoline. We're going to look at what happens to the demand curve for gasoline in each of the following scenarios. A, the price of cars falls. B, the price of gasoline falls. And C, the price of electric cars falls. What happens to the demand curve for gasoline if the price of cars falls? Gasoline and cars are complements. In other words, if you buy a car, you also need to buy gasoline. A fall in the price of cars would increase demand for gasoline, shifting the demand curve for gasoline to the right. What happens to the demand curve for gasoline if the price of gasoline falls? Well, the demand curve does not shift. Remember, demand curve shifters are non-price factors. Because it is a change in price, the curve does not shift. However, there will be a movement down along the demand curve to a point with a lower price and a higher quantity demanded. What happens if the price of electric cars falls? Gasoline and electric cars are in some ways substitutes. If you buy an electric car, you don't buy gasoline. A fall in the price of electric cars would mean there will be less demand for gasoline, shifting the demand for gasoline to the left. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.